Back here at the Democrats' convention in the convention hall in Miami Beach, where tonight they nominate their candidate for the presidency. We've been advised that George McGovern is appearing.
This is David Shoemaker. George McGovern has just come downstairs. We're in the lobby of the Doral Hotel. There is a crowd here of several hundred.
I make a flat pledge that if I become the President of the United States, every American soldier, every American prisoner, every American now involved in the war in Southeast Asia, every bomber will quit flying, all American military aid to General II will cease, and I don't have the slightest doubt that within 90 days of my inauguration, every American troop and every American soldier will be home. That's the pledge I make.
This scene is being watched all over Miami Beach and out at the Flamingo Park, and if it goes on too long, of course, it will certainly draw people. They're shouting now marijuana. There was a question about the legalization of marijuana.
I do not believe in sending anybody to the penitentiary for the use of marijuana. I'm not prepared to advocate the complete legalization of marijuana. I was
recently made a speech in Congress where he talked about the involvement of the Central Intelligence Agency in the opium trade between Laos, Thailand, Saigon, and Formosa. We've been doing research into this for 2 years. But 2 years before we could even get it into Congress. We have great reams of documented proof that the Nixon administration is actually covering up the second major source of heroin in the world, or it's in the United States. Now, my mother sent you a letter where she asked about this. You said it wasn't true. How can you expect to have credibility if you're going to cover up like the other people?
Because I was the first and I believe the only member of the United States Senate that made the charge publicly that I thought South Vietnamese officials were conniving in the heroin traffic. And I thought that an investigation was needed, and I demand that an investigation be conducted to see whether any American or any official in the government of South Vietnam that we were backing was involved in the heroin trade. I even made the charge. It was my belief that that kind of illicit traffic.
There are 34 million people in this country, according to life, who smoke marijuana occasionally. How do we protect these people from hard drugs if marijuana cannot be controlled like alcohol is? If a kid has to go to a pusher to get marijuana because he knows that's harmless, how do we protect them from the other stuff that the pusher is selling unless we can sell marijuana over the counter like alcohol?
Good evening. I'm Ted Koppel reporting tonight from New York, and we are continuing our national town meeting on the legalization of drugs.
The first thing to do would be to make marijuana legally available and fairly readily available, like alcohol or tobacco, but with stricter controls. We know right now that 60 million Americans in this country have smoked marijuana. Between 20 and 30 million are smoking it right now. We have 0 overdose deaths. We know that the vast majority of people who smoke marijuana have not gone on to harder drugs. Last week, the administrative judge of the DEA suit was asked whether or not marijuana should be made legally available for medical purposes to deal with chemotherapy. The DEA judge said that compared in toxicity to aspirin, marijuana is overwhelmingly safer. He said that marijuana is perhaps one of the most safest psychoactive substances ever known to man. Now, that's very simply. When Mayor Koch talks about throwing users into jail, when Mayor Koch says that 60 million Americans
that have to be addressed now are cocaine and heroin and crack. And when we've addressed those, even though most of us believe that marijuana ought to not be legalized, that's the last one on the list.
The exact quote
from the federal judge was the safest therapeutically active substance known to mankind. That means safer than caffeine, safer than aspirin. That means you're putting people in jail for basically doing something that's completely harmless.
Let me turn to
How can you talk about locking people up in work camps? How can you talk about taking people homes away from them, evicting people in New York City?
All right.
Why do you want
just
to
1 second.
How can you justify?
I may have made a.
How can you justify a situation where you've eliminated pot, but crack and heroin are 4 times more available, 4 times cheaper than the beginning of the Reagan War on drugs? All you've done is design
Just hold it.
a system that gets rid of marijuana.
I think.
Leaving our drugs.
Okay.
That's all you've done.
Stepping before the boys and girls of Boys and Girls High in Bedford-Stuyvesant, saying he was encouraged by the support of youth, and he said it cut his age down by 25 years as he stood there looking out at the exuberant crowd. 25 years, that's 2 years less than he spent in prison in South Africa after his arrest for operating with the military wing of the African National Congress.
December 12th, 1980, Howard Lotsoff, Norma Alexander, and I had a meeting on the 2nd floor where we initiated the development of Ibogaine as a cure for addiction. We did it because we had a heroin problem here, but it turned out to work for many other substances, and all the Ibogaine in the world, a cure for addiction for 200 million people, came out of the place behind me. I think that something that historic, that world-shaking, deserves a museum.
So I'm really happy to be here in front of 9 Bleecker again because it has so many memories, but it's also sad because we no longer have access to the building. By we, I mean not just Dana Beal, but the entire community here in New York City of activists and artists and musicians and occupiers and who had come here to use this place to stage events, to have meetings, to plan actions. This was a real supportive space for dissent and free speech and protest.
Here, working people who bring arts and culture, the real base of this community, and people who give the stability to the community. Number 9 was a very important place in those days. It was a place where people met, where people networked, where meetings were held, and provided a central focus and locus of activity for people who were involved in the squatting movement in the Lower East Side in the 1980s. So it was a very important and crucial part of that.
The 60s. History of the Black Panthers, the Yippies, the anti-war movement, the anti-nuke movement, the anti-intervention movement. We all converged over there at one time or other. There's a lot of history in that place.
And the whole neighborhood seems to operate under a principle of real estate avarice. You can do whatever you want as long as it's the highest bidder. And that leaves no place for actual culture. The things that made this neighborhood attractive to the people who came to ruin it is exactly what they're cutting out from under them and from everybody else.
And it's part of what makes New York special. And having a space like this is something that is unique to New York. It has a flavor and it has a feel and it has an energy and a vibrancy that that really resonates New York.
And show him where the Yippie Museum is, and show him the history, and tell him about stumbling out of there and roaming across the street into CBGB's and seeing some incredibly weird and bizarre punk show, all the great times and all the great things.
We need money to secure the building, get back in here, and open up the museum the way it should be, help to create our dream and help us to reoccupy the Yippie Museum.